Good morning, officially, and and welcome to Help the Helpers. And we're so delighted to have Rachel with us this morning, to have our own Rachel talking about something she's really passionate about, and I think we will be able to really sink our teeth into. I was saying to Rachel, there's no need to be nervous because presenting is simply being the first one to start a conversation, and you're starting a conversation with the group, but also in a focusing oriented presentation, you're starting a conversation of us people with our inner selves, the one in there. So our presentations are beginning a conversation within us and between us. You should have gotten a notice, a little flyer of the whole month's speakers. And if you can look that over and see the sumptuous feast that we will have for this month, this winter month, and send that off to colleagues and friends so we can make this available for other people also. So I'm going to introduce Rachel as a dear, focusing oriented collaborator and dialogue partner. And Rachel is in our community empowerment leadership, and she is an attorney and a divorce mediator, which seems like the hardest job. I can't imagine how she does that. I think that's very, very hard. And also a focusing oriented professional. And Rachel in many, many ways. So I won't introduce her anymore, but welcome, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you. Just first want to say how privileged I feel to be a part of this community all the time, and to be known by and to know all of you, even just as a collective. And something in just preparing what I'm going to talk about today is really in a little introduction, three points, and then I would like to, unless somebody else maybe opts to lead an attunement, I have just a brief attunement to lead us in before we do the breakout groups. And I forgot to say that after I give my little presentation, which I'm aiming to keep to about 15 minutes, of course, there'll be time to hear from each of you, whatever struck you, whatever's alive in you and might want to be shared. So really, just to begin, welcome, namaste, or however one likes to be welcomed and greeted. Welcome in. Lynn just at the beginning said, come sit around the fire, and or I'm paraphrasing, but there's something that I'm so struck with when I thought of preparing, and I think of coming to these meetings, which through COVID have been life-saving. The importance of one another and the importance of just being here together and showing up, and how metaphorically, but in some ways quite literally, we're gathering around the fire, and there's an implicit safety in that. We're often in a dark woods and don't know what's around and hear howling in the background, but there's something in coming around a fire together, the comfort of that, the reassurance, and that we're more together. And also just the sense that we're all really one another that stands between ourselves, our fears, our aloneness, and the great beyond, the darkness, the unknown, existentialism and the over-exploration of it. So a real gratitude in being able to be a part of a group. And this leads, thank goodness, into what the content of what I want to speak about. And that is what makes it possible? What are a couple of focusing tools that make it possible or can make it better to be in interaction when things are conflictual, when there are difficulties, and even just to stay in prolonged interaction with one another. And the first of those things, oh, now I'm going to show an image. Stay tuned, everyone, buckle up. I'm going to share screen and go, aha, this is the image that I want to share. This is a little image of otters. And when they go to sleep, I think it's just a kind of representative of what I'm talking about. First of all, how darling is that? Second of all, when otters go to sleep at night, you know, I imagine the water's dark, the skies are dark. When they go to sleep at night, they hold hands so they don't lose track of one another by the morning. And that to me is very much what we do, coming together on Wednesdays, on Mondays, in our focusing sessions. We sort of keep holding hands with one another and stay in contact. And how vitally important that is and how sacred that is. And also how darling, look at us. Cute. So, okay, so that's the image for that. Then the beginning of what I wanted to really speak about is the first thing that I find can be very helpful in interactions is, and I'll stop sharing this for a moment if I know how. I'll stop sharing this and then I'll share another, is the right distance. And keeping in mind, often that's so helpful in a focusing session when one is just inside and something is too close or starts to flood, there's something that's sort of too hot and needs to be set down. But also, I'm curious about how that might be in interaction and when taking in another, sort of in the natural way that we kind of groove in listening and talking and exchanging. And if we're able to bring in at times, is this a right distance? Or, you know, sort of as an internal checking in. Am I at a distance that's helpful? Or am I so close that I am not able to really see the other and also sense into my own wholeness, the universe that is me, and be respectful of that universe that is the other. So sometimes if that might mean something as simple as a couple of, again, this might just be a bit of an internal or an imaginative exercise, but pausing, you know, our famous pause, but exploring, might I take just a step back, and maybe 2 feet back, and maybe I need for this one to be 50 feet away, or at the top of a high tree limb to really get a little more perspective on the other and on myself here in this interaction. And maybe I need a whole cycle of a day as distance. And one example I have from my life of not having the right distance is when I'm in Manhattan, in a part where there are tons of buildings, and I'm so close to another building, you know, I'm just on the sidewalk. What I see when I turn to look at the building is just my own reflection in it. And in order to really, I don't know how many floors the building is. I don't know who's the architect, what the building even looks like at the top. I just see myself. And I find my relationship with my mom is a lot like that. Whatever she's looking like, you know, I'm only really seeing some version back of myself. And that's really what's most captivating, you know, do I look fat in these pants instead of who built this? Is this a building that's going to stand? Is this an important architectural site? And in order to really appreciate that, I might need to be blocks away from a higher building, but knowing that my perspective can be limited and that there are things I can do to broaden it or to help it so I can shift the relationship I'm in with the building and make more room to have a different relationship. So it's not just how the building's reflecting me back. So hopefully that's sort of one example that is it kind of dictates the need for some distance and just the possibility of bringing a bit of that into how we relate to one another. The second thing that I find is a go-to when I'm relating, certainly in my work, which, as Lynn pointed out, can be challenging. People are very entitled to be at their very worst, going through crisis, going through divorce, and so forth. So in those contexts, but also in personal relationships, trying to really come back to again and again, like a leitmotif, in a piece of music, the one in there that I'm aiming to be in relationship with, whatever the personality might be, and whatever else might be interfering or whatever's stirred up in me, all of that's there too. But am I able to kind of, I guess like a mariner might be just looking for the lighthouse. You're somewhere at shore, but can I have a glimpse of the lighthouse? To be interested in and seeking the one in there, and constantly being tossed back into personality and what's my point. I'm sorry for the background noise. My house is rigged up with lots of background noises that have spurious use at best, but to be sort of coming back again and again, like to a chorus or something recognizable, even if I can't get hold of the one in there, to keep some sense that there's the one that maybe 60 years ago would cry when it needed to be changed and reached its arms up and just needed to be held, and maybe didn't get held, and the relief that the one in there is seeking to be calm, to know someone is here to hold on to you, and verbally often, and there's a comfort needed. But those very essential qualities that we all share, they're so deeply personal, and yet each of us has them, and however disidentified or however much static is in the way of me maybe connecting with the other, if I can remember to look towards the one in there, even if I can't see the lighthouse, to know there's a lighthouse there, that can be very helpful to have a more loving intention, and probably my listening changes, and the way that I want to be of service changes, because the one in there always sort of has my attention and has my heart. And I think too of that, just to give a little image, I'm going to share screen again. I think when I find the share screen button, okay. And this image here, we have our otters, and then Sam, you will help me. How do I go to the next? Oh, the next image. Oh, these were some images of the right distance. I'm going back for a moment. This is my dog, Maisie Pants, and my friend Sam's cat, Pericles. And you can see by their names, they're not maybe intended immediately to be friends, but Maisie has this curiosity, and Perry needs quite a distance, and she has this real loving curiosity, and Perry has terror. And then we have, I don't know if this is quite where he gets into the saying, get lost, you're too close, right distance, which has not been established. But there's this sort of dearness and tolerance or something in this interaction. There's a Terry needs the distance, and Maisie has this just abundance of, she wants to groom him, she wants to lick him, she wants to cuddle with him, she wants to guard him, and he sadly is experiencing sheer terror. But this interaction, it's just animals, but it's so curious. And this, oh, I'm going the wrong direction. Aha. This is what I wanted to show. This is Maisie. This, I feel, is maybe the one in there. This is just her bounding on the sea and flying, her feet are off the ground. This is not really her in relation to me. It's just her in relation to her own life force. She's bounding and flying through the air and sort of joyous, and it's just ignited in her in being in the world. And so I maybe just wanted to share this picture, but when I think of sort of the one in there, it's just the essence, like when a child is just singing, or also how we might relate to the one in there is sort of with the diminutive, when we think of how we are with children in our care. And we might have different feelings about particular children, but if we're the grown-up and it's time to cross the street, we're going to make sure we solidly have the hand of each of those children and keep them out of harm's way and be their guardian across the road. And that sense of the pride even in being able to lend our wholeness or our adultness to the ones in there, in ourselves and in one another. When I think of just taking the little sticky, small fingers that, you know, don't get washed as often as we tell them to, and holding on to them and shepherding them across the street, that's some of the intention I aim to bring in, or I have greater success in my relating, or more breadth to relate when I'm thinking of, there's that one in there that also needs my attention, however much the others is kind of hooting and hollering. Finally, the meat and potatoes, what I am aiming to get to here goes with, I think, this last image, and then I'll stop sharing this image. To this wonderful concept of taking nothing literally. And if we are to regard one another in a manner, and again, just experimenting and holding all of this very lightly, but the idea of regarding one another the way we might regard a piece of artwork that we're going to a gallery to view, to observe. The artwork isn't attacking us or telling us we're less than, or aiming to even have a particular direct interaction with us. It's not criticizing us or reminding us we didn't finish grad school or anything. It's just there, expressing itself, representing something. But also what goes into a piece of art is at least as complicated as what goes into the formation of each one of us. There's a particular, I have no idea what particular piece of art this is, so please don't take that literally. It's just the notion of someone looking at a piece of art, and can we look at one another on occasion as if we're a painting, as if we're a portrait. And who created the portrait? Not the portrait itself. There was a school of art often. There was a particular patron who needed certain things, like his own family represented. There is a political agenda often where something that's going on in the times is meant to come through in the art, or something's to be displayed because it's also might have a propaganda agenda. And so there's so much, there's so many, there's such a history in viewing a piece of art or hearing a piece of music. And with each of us, Jean says, I hope I have this quote right, we are at least plants. And I'd like to expand that to say, And by that, he's speaking of how we're at least interacting as much as a plant does, needing light, needing soil. And we're at least that complicated and are owed that level of respect. And I'd like to say each of us are at least works of art, or at least gallery pieces, or at least poems. And the same approach in reading a poem, that the intent, the seriousness, what we pull from ourselves to be able to hear a poem or study a poem, and how if we only are to take it literally and read it through once, we might get, this is lovely, this has couplets, this rhymes, this is interesting words. But then to unpack the poem and to know that there's much, much more there, and to really have the true impact and the hauntingness and the message and something more, the real experience of the poem, takes a kind of concentration and effort and interested curiosity and time and attention to sort of unpack what is meant there. So to experiment with having that, and just one example on that, I was having an exchange with Lynn and said, well, should I read you this text message? And Lynn said, yes, read me the text message, but read it as though it was a 16th century poem. And so this is just a text message that had gotten me agitated, but to unpack it in a way as though it were something a bit more sacred, a bit more complex and foreign, which in a way it is. Every communication from another in a way is at least as mysterious as a meteor landing on our planet, on our doorstep. And to carry some of that interest and the mystery of it. And how can we be with this when we take the right distance, when we're looking for the one in there, when we're taking one another, not literally. When I can't talk to you, maybe doesn't mean I can't talk to you, might mean I'm having a terrible time, or I'm, I can't talk to you the way I want. It can mean many, many things, but it's kind of, it doesn't have to just trigger the exact same response in me of, going under the table emotionally. It can be oh, you can't talk to me now. Juicy. As a Lynn Preston response might be, more in there. So I love that. And the sort of possibilities of working towards that feels so generative. And of course, there are many more ways, and I'm very curious to hear from all of you, ways that you're able to stay in contact with one another and be with one another in conflict. And really, I think for me, with the idea that we can always be in connection in some way, and that the right distance doesn't need to mean going away and not coming back, but finding a way to remain together, knowing how vital it is to stay in contact and to know we can be connected. So that is really, I think, the conclusion of my talk. I'm sure there are other things that will come, but thank you for having me and hearing me. And then I'll come back with an attunement if that's workable for everyone before the breakout sessions. So I open the floor, Lynn, to you and to whomever might want to.
Thank you. That was really juicy. Very, very juicy reflection. Wow. So let's take a minute to digest all of those wonderful ideas, heartfelt ideas that Rachel gave us to chew on. Wow, it really percolated a lot for me. I love that idea of looking at the other as a work of art. Okay, what's there for you? You might want to just start with what struck you. What was a new idea, or what was what was a helpful idea or some idea that came to you or whatever is there, as we say.
Lynn, this is Laura. As I was watching my friend Rachel give a talk, I started to feel nervous. And I realized, well, I wonder what it would be like if I put this on gallery view rather than having, like finding the right distance on Zoom. There's at least two options, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, so I was struck with that. Also, I too love the idea of thinking of the person in front of me as a work of art and all the intricacies and the way that that invites me to relate to the other person, not as Rachel was referring to, as a reflection of myself, not as a mirror, but as a mystery, as a mother lode source of felt senses, right? With a piece of art giving me a hit, and then staying with that and accompanying it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. I love that idea of gallery view as a metaphor, and thinking about how when we want the right distance, we can choose the device in ourselves that we want. Like on my phone, I only see 4 people. On my iPad, I think I see 9 people. On this desktop, I can see 25 people. So I'm thinking about how I can set my inner device to see either very closely or this broad view of all of it.
I have one in particular, but I've had other patients who I've been somewhat frightened of, or they're very attacking, they're very criticizing, I feel assaulted. That's the experience. And I think that having the one in there as a resource, sort of like, oh, so there's all this rage and sometimes even criticism and blame, and you didn't do this and you didn't do that, and you haven't helped me, and you don't even care, and blah blah blah. So I hear all of that, and then I think that it can think of, as I was listening to you, think, well, what would it be to just pause and sense what's the one in there that's saying all this? What's the one in there needing? And it helps, like I say, to be a kind of resource. And now my cat's coming up and wants to join the conversation. Okay. That's enough. That's all I really had to say. If I can.
I think this could be a cats meeting. Too.
I just want to say I loved your presentation. Thank you so much. It feels so true these days. I have a friend in particular that it really applied to. And in my thinking about what's going on, quote unquote, between the two of us, I mean, it sort of feels to me, I mean, if I were to put it in my first rash feeling, oh, I'm there for her when she needs me, but she's not there for me, kind of thing. And then further looking into it, I realize another piece, which is, yes, she has, for different reasons, a much busier life than I do. And there's a part of me that has feelings about that, of quote unquote jealousy, And when I realized that she is a very busy woman, her family lives nearby, whereas mine lives far away. So, I had different feelings, and I calmed down a little bit. when I realized, yeah, I have feelings about everything she has going on for her. And I have to work with myself too.
Beautiful. June, thank you so much for saying all of that and for also bringing some kind of facts to how it can be applied. And it reminds me, I had wanted to say, to be looking for the one in there in the other. And when I had that idea or that image of holding hands with the two little ones, the one of the little ones or the one in there is our own, is ourself, and how we would also be holding that one's hand at the same time. And for me anyway, not being expert at this whatsoever, a student of it, just coming back to holding my own hand and things that can be so triggering, like, oh, I'm feeling jealous, or what does this mean about me? Or these are very uncomfortable feelings. And how to hold my own hand and spend that time. That one in there is also crying or struggling, or maybe, being shamed by, oh, don't feel jealous, or don't feel angry, be understanding. And so having that, paying attention to that one too, but then coming to the one in there equally and attending to. So that it stirs up a lot. This friend not being responsive or reciprocal in the way that you would like, and holding your one in there as well is a big part of how to be in relation. Not abandoning either of the ones in there. All ones in there welcome. Steph, did you want to say something? You're muted.
Oh, sorry, I was just laughing and enjoying. Sure,
Oh, good.
you.
Laughing and chortle away.
Thank you, Rachel, so much. This is such a rich conversation. And I wanted to kind of combine what Charles said with what June said, the in there and me and the in there and the other person. Because in 2010, my husband had a major loss. And he started acting out for a few years, and it was really difficult for the marriage. And I really had to take care of myself while this was happening, but also being aware that in there, he was dealing with this grief, that I felt that this was grief happening. So it was like one of those moments in my life where it was like, I had to be there for me, my in there part, and also let him be there for himself, because it was sometimes too much for me to be there for him, when he was going through what he was going through. So it was an interesting time in my life, but it kind of relates to both, to what you're saying. And I love this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I love the idea of needing to remember the other, the one in there, with other people that I'm speaking to in non-focusing ways, because it enables me to see them so differently. And I'm just thinking of a relationship over the weekend that would be helpful to somehow try to get to the one in there instead of feeling critical about little things here and there. So that's, sometimes it's easier than others. It's interesting how I often gravitate to looking at the one in there, but not always. And I think it's when I find myself, I'm recognizing that when I find myself being critical of someone, I'm totally missing the one in there. And I need to pay more attention to that.
That's such a wonderful way to say it, Nancy, that when we're critical of someone, there's a particular energy to that. And it's very different than really being interested in the one in there. And remembering that sometimes you can sort of switch over, like, well, what is that person for themselves, in themselves?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Please, Jane, my friend.
That was wonderful. It's wonderful to hear whatever you say. It's so special.
A true friend.
And I was struck by many things, but particularly by your pictures of Maisie. I really want to see her, meet her. And her running on the beach with this abandon and this youthfulness. And I relate, and I see, so I am in my 80s, well into my 80s, but still have that place inside of me. And also my friends a lot of friends are also old, and to be able to see that in them instead of sort of this person who's walking more slowly and forgets their words, and as we do. And it was just such a liveliness. It gives me so much, I don't know, buoyancy and bounce to be able to just say, I could do that. Of course I can't, but I physically, but I can in spirit. And so, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jane. So delightful to be with you and see you.
I love that image of all of us having an inner Maisie enjoying the beach.
What if I can, just from Nancy, and thank you everybody who shared so far, that real reminder, which I don't think I necessarily highlighted as much as I intended to, but of not only in relation with the other, but really each of these things in relation with ourselves, to not, Lynn will say, don't believe everything you think, and don't take yourself so literally. And that is, takes a moment of like resetting one's ego and reorienting oneself, and then how freeing to be like, I'm mad as hell, I want to burn the place down. Oh, but really, it's that, but there's a whole poem all the time writing itself or unfolding. And a quote that I love that got me probably well through from high school to graduate school to beyond, from in the study of romantic poets, which was one of my favorite things and probably saving graces. Coleridge says, he talks about in approaching poetry, to have the willing suspension of disbelief when you read a poem, and that you're not coming just with your left brain or just with your critical lining up thinking, of course, that you want to read a grocery list with that brain or a medical journal, but to have a willing suspension of disbelief with ourselves, in our approach to ourselves and in our approach to our interactions and the messages from others, is such a lovely way to appreciate, all right, that doesn't necessarily quite make sense on the sense scale, but something is being communicated. Someone wants you never, ever, ever to leave, or they want you to give them a lot of space, or they're expressing something. If there's the power to not take it literally, there is so much more to be done, and we can maybe choose to be a little closer or a little less threatened by it, and even hold it at a greater distance, to not take our clients or our patients entirely literally, to take them quite seriously and their experience, to be on the side of the one in there, but to not be enslaved by our language or our own expressions, and to just kind of make a poetic sort of space there to welcome the imagination in a way.
I love that, Rachel. And I think that's what focusing is, right? That when we're focusing, we're listening to ourselves, to what comes to us as a poem, and we're allowing it to be evocative, and we're allowing it to speak to us And so we are kind of seeing each other as a work of art. I was thinking about when you said, Rachel, that the work of art, first you said it's just there. It's not speaking to you or accusing you or confusing you or something. And then I was thinking that's right. On the one hand, on the other hand, it is when it's a political statement or any kind of statement, it's speaking to you. I remember my art teacher saying to me, you better watch out, Lynn, because someday if you don't watch your tendency to be decorative, somebody's going to walk by in a gallery and see your picture and say, oh, that's nice, and walk on. And I was so taken with that, because the thought of my picture being in a gallery and people walking by and saying it's nice seemed pretty good to me. And it took me, it took me a while to see what she was getting at. And all of us are works of art that are saying something. And when I see a work of art that gives me the creeps, or it disturbs me, or it makes me angry, or it makes me confused, if I stand back and I say, well, what is it saying? What is it trying to say? And what is it saying to me? And it isn't saying it to me, Rachel is reminding us personally as an individual, but it does have a message, and all of us have messages for each other that we can only get those messages by standing back, and sometimes by standing up really, really close to see the brush strokes, to see how it's how the colors are blended, what colors are in it. So I love that metaphor, Rachel. I'm going to think about it a lot.
Yes, so all good. And as we're talking about it, it's coming to me how these things sort of work together in a way. They're not necessarily just sort of three focusing ideas of how to kind of bring into play, but when something is really pulling you in, for me, I guess these are ways to get a bit of distance. I tend to get right up close. That's my default, right up close and very personal, and the painting speaking to me, not quite literally, but I can have a strong reaction. So the having a bit of freedom to take a step back, or to know this is a whole painting, this is a whole person formed after many generations of all different kinds of needs being met, needs being unmet, being loved enough, being not loved enough, having its dreams achieved, having disappointments, to have that wholeness, not just they cut me off or they were a jerk, or there's this wholeness, to keep coming back to that a bit, while also having the right distance and knowing there's a one in there, and holding closely, coming back to my one in there that might be having a very strong reaction, or feel very hurt or abandoned or shamed by the interaction, by sort of being there for the ones in there, having them be present, sort of. I think that all can kind of make support of each other and make things possible. Thank you, everybody who shared. Is there anyone who yay, Dorothy, hello and welcome.
Hi, Rachel. I'm just thinking of one of the recent conversations I had with you, how you talked about creating this community of help for helpers, and how today I'm feeling so strongly like all these conversations, like I am part of this community. I mean, it's so extraordinary to think of, like, you could have a Zoom community, but like as each person speaks week after week or month or whenever, like I really do get to know people more and more. And I felt like there's something about your presence with your wonderful ideas of bringing these concepts so alive. I just felt like each person added to the community of focusing the ideas and the individual understanding of the concepts. And I just love that. I love that. And also I just wanted to add my little piece of the getting the distance and the person in there. Like all of them came together when I was at the memorial of a good friend whose husband passed away. And I was speaking and saying something about what I called the sunroom in her apartment. And she just like, she can have a very harsh voice. And she said, no, it's not the sunroom. It's the greenhouse. It's the greenhouse. And I'm like, oh my goodness, here there's 25 people in the room. And like, I felt like I was 3 years old and you said the wrong word. And then like just coming back, the one inside of me and the one inside of her, and looking at her and taking her in and not getting lost in the criticism. And then she said, Bill would have won. It was Bill's name. The greenhouse was Bill's word for it. And then I got it right away. Like she was honoring him and it was his word. And that was her need. And it gave me so much more understanding. So thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you. Monica, so sorry. I did not see your hand raised, and 2 people at least said Monica has her hand raised. So we are community wanting to get each other's back.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, please.
Yeah, I right away feel very touched by your story, Dorothy, of the little could have been 3-year-old or holding the 3-year-old, and then hearing your other loved one describing how that word was so meaningful to them, and how important, how that reflects Rachel's teaching here of taking distance and standing back. And I recently experienced that with my stepmother just this last weekend, and it was a wonderful experience to be able to use focusing to stand back and be with the one in there. And it's just so exciting to have this work come alive. And I also want to say, have a little pause to appreciate you, Rachel, that all that you've described so eloquently and put together so beautifully with the images, none of this wisdom could have been easy to accumulate.
Thank you.
I can just imagine all of the Rachels going back in time. And I feel, oh, here's Rachel here learning this. Here's Rachel here learning this. And here's Rachel here learning this. And here's Rachel here teaching this. So appreciate your wisdom, Rachel.
Monica, thank you. It's so lovely to see you and be with you. Yeah, there's something very exciting. There was I don't know if any of you guys were at this. There was something, it was a couple of years ago, and it was Lynn in your apartment. It was part of the Focusing International, one of the conferences, like a Felt Sense conference. And you had something, and you might be sick of hearing me say this, but it's one of my favorite stories. And so we had, it was sort of a carryover from the workshop. It was being held down at, where was it, Susan? It was some part, it wasn't in Judson, but it was some, it was at the Jewish center that where we had his memorial. So, but then we took the show on the road and went to Lynn's apartment for a workshop. And so all these personalities and whatever the genesis of this like hour or two workshop was going to be. And one of the people, so just all different focusing people, different levels. And one of the people there got very sort of excited and I think angry about something that Lynn had said, and we were moving around the room. I remember us, we weren't seated, we were sort of moving, and sort of that the anger or the frustration was directed at Lynn, and Lynn got right into the march with this person, and she was like, Lynn said something like, "Wow, you're really angry here. What's that about?" And Lynn the woman was kind of walking like this, and Lynn was celebrating the walk with her and really on the side of whatever was in her that was really in there. There was no threat, there was no ego, there was no going at, where my automatic would be a hold on, or you're disruptive, you waited in the closet, we'll deal with you later. It was, what's happening for you? How exciting, you're really angry, let's know more. And there was a real like celebration of whatever was occurring for the person, and there was an implied safety about it as well. Like, we can really be with this together and know more about it, and nobody's going to be harmed, or it was this moving towards, and I always hold that as like a goal. I would love to be able to, instead of dropping under the shoulder and having a flashback to Nam, which I was not even in that war, but if somebody's coming at me, I'm like, hit the deck, get shelter. And Lynn could be like, it's a dance, and what more can we learn? And that sets a real goal for how I would love to have that as an option, as like a color in my palette, to be on the side of the one in there when I'm really feeling all my, I'm kind of screaming inside of this is threatening or dangerous, in some way. So I don't know if I told that story right, but that's one of my favorite, or if anybody has questions about that.
Thank you, Rachel. You're
Thank you, Rachel, for that. I really appreciate that story. I really do.
Oh,
I mean, I'm thinking of a recent situation. I wasn't in it, but watching the facilitator be in it and not be able to do what Lynn did. And she's a good facilitator, and my heart went for her. But, and we were the audience seeing what's inside the people that were struggling. We could see it. And it just, all that it needed was a pause, like nothing. It needed nothing to allow it to exist and to be. Like, we don't need the answers all the time or to patch it, And if the facilitator could have just let it be, but she didn't. She took it too personal. It went too deep. So I'll remember that story, because the way that you describe it gave it a texture, a name to it that's different than what I had in my mind. I was in my mind, I had, why didn't she shut up, But there's a beauty in if silence could have been the sacredness of the experience, because there was a lot of anger and a lot of pain and a lot of racial tension. And I think that sometimes that needs a lot of validation to the pain that's there of the other. And sometimes silence also could be a healer, and just pausing and just allowing. But when you're facilitating something, you need to go to the next thing. And sometimes the next thing takes more importance than what's inside and what's in there of the other. And so the fact that Lynn just paused and said, you have, she named it, and that you still remember it, Rachel, that it did so much for you, and you telling it to us stays with me.
I just want to say that we probably all have both facilitators in us, right? I've certainly did. And we can learn from both, right? We can learn from the person who gets snagged and the person that doesn't get snagged. And we're all both in both of those situations, I think. But I'm thinking that we may need this time to have a brief attunement that Rachel's going to give us, and we want to have at least 15 minutes in our breakout rooms. So I think this conversation could really go on, and I would love it to.
Colleen's little hand is up though, Lynn. I just want.
Oh, thank you.
Colleen, yes,
Seriously,
please.
rely on you people for seeing hands.
Yes, thank you for saying, because I am often not seeing them. Pauline, if you'll unmute yourself, we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, thank you. And thanks, Rachel, and thanks, thanks for the energy or the, being part of this. I just kind of really struck by the difference of interpretation, that I heard Ansi saying that Lynn paused. I heard Rachel say that Lynn became excited and animated and she wanted to get in there, so I think maybe it's like for me with this talk, understanding that the one within is the one that I have to trust. That's all I've got in the moment, and that has to be good enough, even though maybe it wouldn't be received, maybe it'd be misunderstood. I feel tearful around that, but that is all that I have in that moment, and to give that maybe just exactly what's needed, so I just feel a sense of warmth at the excitement that people trust themselves, so lovely. Thank you.
Last comment, Pauline, before we have our attunement. It's a wonderful one.
Thank you.
And can I just respond to something Pauline said? Pauline, I loved your sharing, Pauline. I didn't say that Lynn paused, but it was an internal pause that allowed her to reflect on what was there in the other. It wasn't like she just stopped. I think sometimes a pause is needed in certain situations just to allow things to be. But in what I heard was that to be able to do what Lynn did, that ability to be there and the other and to be present like that, it requires so much, like someone said about Rachel's wisdom that comes with that you can just be so empathic and compassionate that you can pause and reflect right away. I wonder what's there for you. Like it's not just a silent pause. I think that my experience of what I was going through required a more silent pause because attention was heavy. But, and what happened was defensiveness came in rather than seeing the other and validating that experience. And some people could do that so quickly that they're so attuned to themselves and others, and that groundedness, not to be defensive around racial issues that come up and how people may interpret things and how they take it. And then stuff happens. And I'm involved in a group, and it's a BIPOC group, and a lot of stuff happens almost every time we meet. And I feel that every opportunity, like we just learn in the present moment, like every opportunity is an opportunity for us to learn. And even that little story that Rachel said is a powerful story that like we never know which story we're going to take with us. Like, yeah. Thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate your talk and everything you shared with us.
Okay. Thank you, Annette. Let's make our attunement very short here because it's terrible how the time goes.
Okay, so thank you. And I think you did bring in another aspect of a sort of even a shorthand way of bringing in these things by having a pause, even though that wasn't all of what you were saying, but by having a breath, by taking a moment and by allowing space, that's almost another way in to these things. So with that, just inviting everyone, please feel free to close eyes, leave eyes open, but maybe just bringing your attention inward and taking a couple of breaths, noticing where you, the amazingness and enormity of you, touches the place that isn't you, the air, where your parameter is in your space. And noticing too if there is some support from the chair or the bench or the floor that you're leaning into or resting on. And seeing if you can be resting while you're turning inward gently and also holding the inner sense of all of us together with you, keeping company with all of that. And in this attunement, just very briefly, you might bring to mind just a thin sliver or pinch of an interaction or a relationship that you're in that is important and that is has some conflict in it, some misunderstanding, or some places that could use a bit of breath, a bit of skillfulness even. And just spending a couple of moments, taking a couple of breaths, bringing something to mind if something is willing to be brought to mind, and noticing how that particular interaction, that particular relationship is with you just now in your system, in your bodily system. If there's a bit of a tensing maybe in the belly or the gut, if there's any sort of straining or an easing when you think of it, and if it feels like it might be supportive, just feeling free to rest your own hand on that place where you might feel something. And while you're very gently spending just a couple moments with this, you might check in if there is a different distance you could try out in this relating. If taking a little step to the left or the right, or maybe excusing yourself to go out of the room for a moment, but maybe leaving the room open, leaving the door open. How that might be, if there's a way to find a little bit of a distance, being quite assured that the relating is there and will be there, and seeing if by taking a little distance, something could relax a bit inside or loosen. And if not, also just staying with that place that's maybe from the one in you that needs your attention, maybe first, before the relating needs the attention, and what it might need to settle, and not even to be bothered with the answer, but to know maybe something more is needed to help that place feel safe and feel all right. And just taking a moment or two there, knowing that really your imagination is the limit. You might need to be hanging from a branch in the tree upside down to get the right distance from this particular interaction, or swimming in a pond a block away to be in this interaction more gently or more easily for you. And holding, as we go into our breakout rooms, the one in there, your one in there, holding hands with it, and maybe having a willingness to hold hands or have a look deeply into one another's one in there as we go into our breakout rooms. And for your breakout, I know sometimes a little direction is helpful. You might take any part of what this little attunement was like for you. You might take any part of what was discussed here, or something entirely different that's fresh for you in the moment. And maybe something about the literal, non-literal, and your own, what you bring to being able to stay engaged with one another, engaged as part of a group, what you rely on in yourself to be able to do that and how that is for you.